Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to Kottabos Space Program, where today we're having a look at Mod Pods, which is being made by forum user Dreaming. And what this glorious little piece of work looks to add into the game is a series of modular extensions to add additional functionality to your command pods, and specifically the Mark 1-2 command pod to add things to it such as additional crew capacity or even added fuel, which may sound very familiar to some of you guys out there. If you remember a video we did not too long ago for the Mark 1 laboratory extension, it did a very similar thing, adding in all these bits and bobs you could attach onto the Mark 1 command pod to do a very similar function. And basically, Dreaming just wanted to supersize that for the Mark 1-2, and I gotta say, I've really been enjoying it so far, and I've actually been keeping tabs on this for a while now. When I first saw it in the development forum, I think back in October is when it first popped up, and so I was very excited to see earlier today, of the day of recording here, that it popped up in the release section for its first official release. So let's take a look at the VAB and have a gander at what all makes this mod possible. So let's grab ourselves, of course, a Mark 1-2 command pod, and thankfully our mod maker included a custom manufacturer tab in here, so we have the Podular Mechanics tab, which is lovely and so convenient, and in here is all the current parts for this mod. Now, the mod maker does plan on adding a lot more in the future, and if you're worried about your save files, you should be good with these parts as they are now, as these pretty much should be set in stone, barring some minor additions, like the interiors of, say, the science lab has some missing textures, but you should be good for the future moving on, as it'll just be new additional parts being added in, which I quite like. So let's start by actually having a look at some engines, which are a bit larger than the Mark 1-2, so let's just grab momentarily a size 2 to size 3 dual fuel tank, which is a liquid fuel and oxidizer container holding 900 liquid fuel and 1100 oxidizer, which extends the Mark 1-2 with some serious fuel holding capabilities. And then, now that it's gone from the sort of 2.5 size to 3.75, we can now add in one of these truncated toroidal aerospike engines, which fits nicely just right down there, as you can see. And now we have an odd little, well, actually quite large triangle with a very powerful engine on the bottom. And let's actually pop this engine up to the top real quick so you can see some of the detailing on the interior here. And I gotta say, I really like the look of this thing. It is very good in the detail on both the texturing and the modeling. And as you can see with not only the engine part, but this little fuel container that we put on, everything is as close to stock alike as could kind of be made, and I always do enjoy that when it does fit in with the stock components quite nicely. Now, the engine here is pretty powerful. It has its own built-in ablator, and the engine itself will have a maximum thrust in vacuum of 1580 kilonewtons and will consume a fairly large amount of fuel at 42.648 liquid fuel per second and 52 oxidizer per second. It also does have its own lifting surface and, of course, some built-in fuel at 600 liquid fuel, 300 monopropellant, and 550 oxidizer. Overall, a pretty powerful engine, as you can see here, most powerful in vacuum, but not too shabby in atmosphere either, with 1347 kilonewtons there. Very impressive indeed, and overall just a very cool and large engine, which you could of course use for anything in the 3.75 meter size. For some reason I always want to say 2.75 meter and 3.5 meter, but no, switch those decimals around. Lovely. The next bit we have is, of course, another engine, so let's pop this baby off, and this one down here. Now, this one is a truncated toroidal aerospike engine like this one. I think those really should have differing names, but you know what? Still cool looking engine. Look at that beautiful thing. I really, really do love it. Let's pop it up the top for any interior detail. Again, not quite as much detail as the previous one, but still some very good things inside. And this one, again, built-in ablator, has not quite as powerful of an engine with a maximum thrust of 980 kilonewtons in vacuum, but of course equally using less power at 26 roughly liquid fuel per second and 32 oxidizer. Again, lifting surface ablator with the amount of 1300 apparently. This one though does not hold any fuel like the previous one did, and yeah, overall, so just sort of balance out what you're wanting, either the fuel or no fuel in there, and of course again a less powerful engine. And then the final one we have, which I believe is named exactly the same yet again. Yes, it is. Teak delete, man, maybe change the names, that might be good. Again, built-in ablator with this thing. Thrust is identical to the toroidal spike engine over here, which uses liquid fuel and oxidizer, but this one is made for monopropellant. So again, exact same thrust at 980 max in vacuum, but this uses 75 monopropellant per second. Again, it does have a lifting surface ablator, etc. Oh, and alternator on this, and I forgot to mention that on the other two as well, with 5 per second on the alternator. Now this one looks exactly the same. Look, it has the same stats and everything, it just uses a different fuel. So instead of the liquid fuel and oxidizer, the monopropellant. So just whichever you feel like using on that mission. And honestly, that actually makes it quite a powerful monopropellant engine, which could be quite fun depending on your particular needs. So now with that out of the way, let's take a look at the rest of these, which if we pop off the fuel container, we can have a look at the Mark II crew cabin, which again, it's Mark II to 3 crew cabin, and there we go. Again, very nicely made, fits in with stock pretty darn nicely, and you'll notice we do have the windows right here, because this can actually be used as a command pod. It's not just a crew cabin, but it will hold a heck of a lot more Kerbals, and it has a crew capacity of 8. It will require, of course, at least 1 Kerbal. It does have its own data transmitter, KerbNet access, reaction wheel, SAS, crew report science experiment, of course, electric charge of 150, and monopropellant of 80, and overall a very beautiful looking crew cabin container. We have the nice hatch here. You can see that it does line up with the Mark 1-2 ladder here, but then the other hatch is offset a bit right there with its own ladder system going down. We do have an amusing terms of use written on the side right there, and if I right click, we can actually pop an antenna, if we zoom in a bit more, out of this thing right here. So there we go, extend our little antenna. Perfect, very nice indeed, and we actually have that functionality on a couple of these parts, which we'll get to, of course, momentarily. And yeah, it's quite cool with the command pod. This thing is very spacious inside. It has 2 pilot seats, and then the remaining 6 seats on the interior are sort of the just generic crew area, which is quite cool. Now the next one we have is the Mark II to 3 Science Lab, which again does have its own data transmitter with that same antenna, as you can see right there. And along with that, it has, well, experience management. It is a science lab, so it'll work the same as the regular science lab for the sort of standard 2.5 meter size. Has KerbNet access, resource converter from liquid fuel. It'll import or an electric charge, make liquid fuel. You can make oxidizer, fuel cells, so you can make electrical charge, liquid fuel and oxidizer, monopropellant, etc. All these wonderful things. Also, of course, a science lab, 1 crew member required for data storage of 750. And then also does surprisingly hold liquid fuel at 8, which is weird. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense because it can produce liquid fuel and oxidizer at 10, but yes, it seems like odd amounts to have there. And it does have a ore container as well at a max of 50, or 15 rather, but it starts at 0, as you can see there. Now, what's really fun about this, and ooh, oh no, it didn't have it on there, never mind. We have, besides our extendable antenna right here, always fun, our lovely ladders that line up here. We also have some additional ladders right here if you need, and what's really fun is if we click the open, we have a lovely little service bay here, so you can put in some experiments or some Kerbal inventory system containers, something like that, just so you have a little bit of exterior storage, which is quite cool. I really like this just little hidden compartment right here. Very nice. And it does have that compatible ladder, as you can see, going over it, and even when it's closed, it is perfectly fine to go up and down that with no issues. Pretty cool little thing. I like the the detail of that, and of course the danger, keep fingers clear right there. Very, very cool. I love that little detail. It's probably one of my favorite things in the mod, honestly. So there we go. That is the science lab. Now the next bit we have is the service bay, which is quite fun because it's just basically a more gigantic version of that little hidden one, and I love how it opens up in the manner that it does. It's just a nice big service bay for you to put whatever your heart desires into, and considering the size of this thing, you could fit like a nice little rover in there, which would be quite cool for any of your landers on Duna. Just land this thing down, crawl into here, and boom, a rover. There we are. Let's pop that one out. We already did look technically at the fuel tank, but let's just pop it on again here. Again, just to add in some nice fuel functionality into your craft so you can have a bit more liquid fuel and oxidizer. We then have a similar one for monopropellant, which does have 2,000 monopropellant, and if we pop that on, very nice. You can see all those monopropellant tanks inside there, and actually if we pop it up at the top, you can see them from there as well. Very, very cool indeed. Same sort of look and style with everything. Functional ladder there. Always good to have. The next part we have is a service module, which is an interesting thing. It's a size 2 to size 3, and it's effectively like the crew cabin, but without the crew compartments. It has a data transmitter, it has its own antenna, it has the RCS FX, so we do have RCS thrusters on this thing, as you can see the RCS ports right there. It has its own built-in reaction wheels, electric charge with 1,000 battery in it, liquid fuel at 675, monopropellant at 450, and oxidizer at 825. This thing's basically holding a heck of a lot more oxygen or oxidizer, liquid fuel, electric charge, monopropellant, everything. And it's a pretty cool little system overall. I do enjoy it, especially with the built-in RCS. It can be very useful, but it just seems, I don't know, maybe a little bit off to me, considering we have I don't know, just other parts. It just seems a little bit weird to me personally, but you may very well find this a perfectly usable and good part, especially with the built-in RCS. It can be quite cool. And the next one we have is another version of the service module, but rather than having a liquid fuel and oxidizer, this one only has monopropellant and at a rate of, or amount rather, of 1,950. So that is that's a heck of a lot there. And so yes, you don't have the liquid fuel and oxidizer, but you got plenty of monopropellant to keep this thing going for a while. So potentially a very useful service module for, say, maybe a space station you're building. That could be a very good use. And now the final part that we have is, oh boy, going from size 3 to size 4, dual fuel tank. And it's the only thing of this size so far, as you can see, and it is, oh boy, massive. And this thing is holding a liquid fuel at the amount of 1,800 and oxidizer at 2,200. Very well made, very well put together, and just overall a very neat little part. And I do love the little shroud here. If we do sort of zoom in, you can see when we unclick there, we can see the sort of tanks inside, and when it fits into the rounded off a bit of that service module, boom, a nice little shroud comes in there. Very nicely made, very good. And yeah, that is the final of the parts that we have at the moment. Again, the mod maker is wanting to add in many more in the future, but for now, we have these simple 11. So let's head out and up to a space station that I built with these earlier, just to show off just some ideas that I briefly had and what you could potentially do with this mod for yourself. So let's go to fly this, and we'll probably have to adjust its orbit as we usually need to. Hold on, hold on. Where is it in its orbit? Yeah, let's just change that really quick so we get a bit more sunlight. So, orbit editor, graphical, and longitudinal node of ascension. There we go, right when we're coming into daylight. Perfect. And we'll turn on the SAS and RCS, and you'll notice I've got a couple of those modular, or those service modules. That's a service module. That's a service module. Another one over there, and I think I've got one or two more on here, so with all the RCS, this should go pretty quick if we just have it angled towards prograde, which we're basically already at. And yeah, so we basically have a simple space station that I built here. Let's actually turn on the lights so things are a bit easier to see. And just a basic idea of what you could potentially build with all these parts. And it's some pretty impressive options with this. For instance, if your space station needed a lot of cargo, bam, we've got 3 service modules that I can open up there. I do like how they open up, how they sort of flower outwards like that. Very cool indeed. And yeah, it's, you know, just cool to have these different parts. I like how you can use them by flipping around as I have to sort of bump out your space station or ship, then bump it back in. Like, for instance, I have a crew module here, and then next to it I have the science lab, which, you know, makes sense. Crew next to science, just it all goes together for the space station. And yeah, you just flip them around to change between sizes. Works quite nicely. And then of course I have a little ship that we've built off the side here, which we'll show off in a moment, to show off one of those engines, which will just detach from the main space station, assuming it works correctly. But first, let's actually take a look at the interiors here. Of course, this should be the standard Mark 1-2. Yes, it does appear to be what we're in. Mark 1-2, Mark 1-2. And now we're actually in the crew compartment here. So we have in here, as I said, 2 different pilot seats from those windows, which we can see out of. We have our standard instrument panels, but if I look down, you can see that there's a lot more going on downstairs than in the Mark 1-2. We've got all sorts of tanks and a lot more room. So if we go over to our other pilot, we can see down there a bit more, and then down towards the crew that is here. We've got Cola and Caffey over here, some sort of weird specimen in a jar up there. We've got various containers, a hatch, another hatch, other crew members there. We're kind of tightly packed in here, as you can see. Again, remember, this does hold 8 in total, 2 pilots and 6 crew members. And yeah, it's just quite nice having all these guys sitting around. I think I've got 4 of them in here and then 2 in the science. What is that thing in there? I don't know, but it kind of freaks me out. There we go. We have this lovely crew container. I think I've got 1 more. Yes, 1 more in here. And then I've got 2 people in the science container next. So let's go to that. And I love this room. Oh, look at all the stuff. We got some cool experiments and things over here, different containers. And then, of course, we have what looks like, I guess, electron microscope or something there. A biocontainment there. Very, very cool. Hopefully, more experiments can get added in here in the future. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some texturing issues if we go to this guy who's sitting in front of a laptop which has 0 textures. We got another one of those over there on the side, as you can see. But overall, a very cool container. I do love the science bits in here. Very fun indeed. A lovely addition. I do love that they do have internal views. Let's actually kick out of there, though. And, yeah. Oh, it's not locked onto that. Why are you not locked onto there, as I told you to be? There we go. Beautiful. So it's makes for an interesting little space station. So if you would like to build it out of this, you know, it's perfectly fine for you to do that, more than just adding on weird things to a ship up there, as I do have on our other bit, which we'll take a look at momentarily, and it can make some pretty interesting things. So if you can sit down with a bit more time and creativity behind you, you could probably build some pretty cool space stations and ships. But let's actually test out our ship that we do have up here. Ah, boy. Now what I did on this was take a Mark 1 command pod, or Mark 1-2, a crew hub, then one of those large, size 3 to 4 fuel tanks, flip the fuel tank around to make another, and then at the bottom is one of those toroidal aerospike engines. So let us detach. There we go. Beautiful. We've released from the space station, and then throttle up to fire. Ah, yeah, look at that flame effect. That is just beautiful. I really do love the look of that. Very, very cool. A lot of thrust. As you can see, we're already more than 1.5 kilometers away from our station, and just getting better and better. So yes, if you would like to try out mod pods for yourself, and I definitely would suggest you do, take a look at the link in the description as always, give it a download, have some fun, and use your creativity to create some intriguing things. But that is going to be it for this episode, my friends. I hope you all have enjoyed, and of course that you do come back for the next when we'll hopefully be looking at yet another wonderful mod. But until that time, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good one.